We're just going to go through a presentation on the Healthy Soil Program, NMDA's Healthy Soil Program. As was mentioned by Jeff earlier, the program came into existence in 2019 into the state legislature. And the backbone of the NMDA Healthy Soil Program is the 5 soil health principles. Depending on what trade magazine you read, or if you visit with NRCS, they may have a different number, but if you look, they all kind of work the same. Real quickly, the Healthy Soil Program grantees must implement at least one of these healthy soil principles. One, keeping the soil covered, you've heard talks about that. Minimize disturbance on cropland and minimize external inputs. We've heard about that quite a bit as well. Maximize biodiversity, maintaining a living root, and then my favorite, integrate animals into land management. But this doesn't just include grazing animals. It includes birds, beneficial insects, keystone species such as earthworms. And so each of these projects that you're going to hear discussed this morning had at least one of those healthy soil principles attached to it. Real quickly, who can apply? Individual applicants. We have 2 different pools of applicants, so to speak. We have our individual applicants, which we have 2 on the stage. Those are farmers, ranchers, other land managers, and they, in addition to applying as an individual applicant, they do have to complete conservation planning within USDA and NRCS. And then they also have to secure project sponsorship from either an SWCD or their tribal government. But then you're also going to hear from an eligible entity. We're going to have Steve Glass talk to us about those local governmental entities with proven land management capacity to support healthy soil. They can apply for our grants as well. These are larger scale grants that they apply for. These could include pueblos, tribes, nations, acequias, land grants, soil and water conservation districts, but also NMSU Cooperative Extension Service. So quite a few different applicant types. Some of the popular projects on cropland, we see cover cropping, applying compost, mulch, biochar. On rangeland, we see that individuals are fencing their pastures into smaller paddocks for intensifying their grazing operation. Bale grazing has become popular with some to restore those critical area treatments, bare ground. The projects occur primarily with our programming. We're bound by the state's fiscal year, and so they will start August 1. So this year's batch will actually start tomorrow, and which is somewhat of a sigh of relief for me and Katie to finally get those kicked out the door. But this year's grants, they're going to start tomorrow, and they'll end up in May of next year. The projects can occur they must occur on land that's in New Mexico. Okay, they can be managed for any purpose, such as farming, ranching, conservation practice, conservation, programs and stuff like that. They can be any size. So these projects can occur on acres all the way down to square foot. So, and then if any land ownership type, you can lease the land, but you must have landowner permission. And then finally, before we get to the important stuff, here's our contact information. I'm just gonna leave it up there. If you want to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter that Katie puts out every week to keep you updated on the Healthy Soil Program, that's where you go to do that. But also, if you just have questions, you can shoot us an email. So now to the good stuff. I'm actually going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, as well as who they're here representing, whether they're a farmer, they're a rancher, or they're representing some other type of entity. I'm going to just go ahead and let them get started on that. So Kristen, if you'll go ahead and get started and just introduce yourself and who you're representing.
Sure. Hi, my name is Kristen Swazowski-Tran, and my farm is called Ladue Grange. I'm in Mota County in a little hamlet called Ladue. I'm a diversified producer. I have rotations of different kinds of vegetable crops. I am involved in different projects that are looking at implementing small-scale grain farming, again in Water County. So I work with the Southwest Grain Collective. I'm one of the producers with them, with Dr. Richard Pratt from NMSNU, who is also involved with the Roundtable Institute. And so we are looking at dryland grain production plot trials on my farm. I'm part of the Soil to Supper program with the Quebrada Coalition. Not only do I have vegetable production, but I have yak, and so you're going to hear a little bit about some of the project that I've done using them in the Healthy Soil program. But I am representing a different segment than you've heard today, which is looking at small-scale food production in northern New Mexico. And so I'm not a commodity farmer, but I am employing a lot of the research that is coming out of commodity farming and agricultural research stations in a small-scale situation. So I'm really excited that you're all here today, and this is an incredible grant opportunity, and I can't wait to tell you all about what I've done on my farm. And
hi, good morning. My name is Peggy Joy Hodgen. I work for the Railroad Park Conservancy. So we are a very small nonprofit based out of Santa Fe, and we steward the Railroad Park, which is an 11-acre native, drought-tolerant, urban green space. So I feel like I'm very different from what we've heard this morning. My position there is horticulture director. I was promoted this year. I'd like to thank probably the grant for the last 2 years for getting me to that point. We've really shifted gears on what we're doing there. We're really proud of the projects we do there. Our main project is horticulture management. We have, so it's 11 acres total, but really the grant is about only 3 acres. And we have native grasslands within that, and that's been a big part of this, along with pollinator garden, community garden. We also do education and art for that park as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Whoa. I'm Steve Glass. I am the board chair for the Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District, which is the one you're in right now. I'm also, I serve on the Soil and Water Conservation Commission for the state, representing Region 1, the 7 districts sort of in the northwest part of New Mexico, and I've been a big supporter of the Healthy Soils program since it was first conceived, and supported the legislation and have served on the board, on the technical review committee a couple of times. I think I'm on there again this year, right, Dean? Yeah. So we are, as opposed to individual applicants, we are an eligible entity, and we have not only supported dozens, if you will, of individual applicants in our district over the past 5 years. We have also applied for and successfully received a number of grants as an eligible entity. Our primary focus over the past few years has been our new flagship project, if you will, which is called the Candelaria Nature Preserve here in Albuquerque. It was an alfalfa farm, and the city of Albuquerque decided that they wanted to convert it from an alfalfa farm into more of a wildlife refuge with grains and other vegetation that attract migratory birds and other wildlife. And so we are fortunate to have partnered with the city on that effort, and we are more fortunate that the Healthy Soils program has provided a number of grants and quite a bit of funding, allowing us to nearly double the city's investment in this conversion process. So we've been very fortunate, both as an eligible entity and as, you know, a sponsor for individual applicants. So big fan of the Healthy Soil program.
Okay, so you can just see by our panelists that we do have a wide variety of individuals and entities that apply, and not only that, but we have that diversity of project goals. You know, from small-scale food production to restoration and rehabilitation of lands that were previously involved in agriculture. So I guess the first question, and like I said, I do want to keep this as informal as possible, and so y'all can fight over who goes first, I don't care. But we've heard several definitions, industry, what I'll call industry definitions of what soil health is. You've heard from several speakers, but for our panelists, I want to ask you, in your own words, what is healthy soil to you? And second part to that, why is it important? Hey, for Roxy.
So to add to what we heard already, I think that when I think about this issue, I think about balance and I think about imbalances. And so a lot of the struggles that I may have as a producer have to do with when things are out of balance. So if I don't have enough predators, I've got too many prairie dogs. If I don't have the right kind of mycorrhizal activity in the soil, I'm going to have all kinds of other auxiliary issues that are going to cause me complications. And I think about that down the line in every single different way. If I don't have enough water, if I, down the line, anytime that there's an imbalance, it's going to create a non-symbiotic relationship. We're going to have a lack of interdependence. So when I think about it, I do think quite a lot about the biological activity. And it's interesting, Secretary Whitty this morning talked about neurogenesis, right? Which is the idea that why would we use an opposite arm when doing something? It's because you're going to reinforce a different neural pathway, and it's going to create a strengthening of that. And the funny thing is that we didn't even know about that solidly until 1998, when they discovered that there was some brand new hippocampal cells being developed in adults. And I know this because in my past life, I was a psychologist. I'm a farmer now, because I had been in an accident and I had suffered some neurodegenerative issues. And so I know a lot about that, and I want to make that connection because we are in an era right now where we are learning about the microbiota, and we're learning about that interrelationship. And that is so incredibly important. We didn't know about this in the 1930s. We didn't understand. We took conventional Eastern farming practices, brought them out to the West in a completely different situation, and in addition to the weather events that culminated in those tragic years during the 1930s, we have to change our farming practices so significantly to think about how we are going from a non-mechanized, small-scale situation to a larger mechanized system. So I just think that the concept of looking at the flora, the megaflora, the microflora, all of that is so incredibly important. And the fact that we have legislation, we have this program that's targeting our intellectual pursuit of understanding what is actually going on and what that relationship might be and how that may or may not relate to yields, how it may or may not relate to carbon sequestration. That was a lot, but that goes on in my mind when I think about healthy soil.
Kristen, you are so well spoken. I was joking to Dean yesterday that if you catch me out in my park, I could talk about healthy soil all day. We host prescribed grazing events, and all I want to do is talk about the importance of having the goats and sheep out and why we're doing what we're doing. And then you put me on a stage, and I'm having a small little panic attack, but it's fun. I really appreciate you all. This is I'm so happy to be here. I think inherently, I think we can also sort of understand that soil health is important. That's where our food comes from. So we just sort of know that. But for me, healthy soil has evolved so much in the last 3 years as I've been doing this project. It is alive. I think some of these little catchphrases that don't call it dirt, right? It's alive. It's something that has micro and macro. It is growing. It has deep roots. It has water holding capacity. It allows us to have diversity of our plant species, allows us to have diversity of our birds and our pollinators. So to Grayson's point, there's so much to it, and it's important to me because it is now my job. Soil health and the soil health principles have become the foundation for our horticulture management. With the Railroad Park Conservancy, it is what we're training our volunteers to do. It is what we are actively, unfortunately, some days feels like fighting for it more than it should be with our local city government. That this should be not just within our park, but it's expanded. So, yeah, it's the foundation. It just kind of for me keeps coming back to healthy soil is it. period, hard stop. So again, I'm so grateful for you all and all the education here. So thank you.
Well, they've already said it all. So, you know, I come from a microbial ecology background at New Mexico State University. I'm happy to say, best university in the state, in my view. And so for me, healthy soil is based in a healthy micro ecosystem in the soil. It's, as said, it's alive. It's the living soil that creates the foundation. The micro ecosystem creates the foundation for the macro ecosystem that feeds us, as well as absorbs the carbon, you know, sequesters carbon, as well as creates all of the ecosystem services upon which we rely. Not only our food production, but oxygen production, but waste recycling, all the stuff that soil does that has been misunderstood or forgotten. I mean, we used to know that as a species back in the day. We used to know how important the Mother Earth is, and as we've become more and more urban and more industrial, we've forgotten that. And so at this point, we're beginning to rediscover it, because it's critical for our survival as a species and the species with which we share this planet, to have those microbial ecosystems supported and robust in our soils. And I will say, as the chair of a district in which most of our constituents are urbanites, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge to try to instill that knowledge and reawaken that understanding. So to me, you know, as was stated earlier a couple of times, is that healthy soil is the absolute foundation for the entire ecosystem of this planet, and that includes us as an element of that ecosystem.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, can I chime in just for a second?
Yeah.
You know, it is fascinating that also when you dig into the soil, you know, you probably have heard this before, but there are microbes that activate the production of serotonin, which is what makes you happy, right? And so you really well said, it is part of us. It's part of our well-being on an incredibly biological level, not only spiritual or you know, enjoyment-wise, but there's an actual function that's being reinforced through that relationship of actually inhaling those entities.
And since I'm moderator, I get to chime in too. But as Katie mentioned, do I need the mic?
Yeah, press that one.
Almost.
Almost. Okay, and as moderator, I'm gonna chime in on this question too, because as Katie mentioned earlier, my son is now going to be the fourth generation, actually on both sides of his family, to farm in eastern New Mexico. And to me, I want him to be a successful farmer. And in order to do that, he's going to have to adapt to change the way things have been done. And you know, I'll go ahead and tell you this up front. That's a difficult road for a fourth generation farmer that still has a couple generations on the ground, and grandpa didn't do it that way. And so, but soil health is important to me, not only because it's my job, you know, but it's our livelihood. And it's my son's livelihood, so, you know, that's completely selfish of me, but at the same time, you know, I want him to be able to, John mentioned earlier that if we don't change the way things are done, on his slide it said we have basically 60 harvests left. Yeah, that's kind of scary. And so, you know, I think about my son, and I want him to be able to harvest as long as he can. And so that's why soil health is important to me. But moving on to the next question, and you know, the NRCS guys are they're gonna associate with this quite well. But when I started with NRCS, there was this new thing coming out as soil health. You know, we started talking about we got sent to different soil health workshops and you know, different things like that. And you know, Steve mentioned it. You know, it's nothing new, but now it is. And you know. they started sending us NRCS employees to these soil health workshops, and I went to Minokan Farm up in South Dakota, if anybody knows where that is. And that's like the epicenter of the large-scale soil health movement. There were some great things done up there. And so that's kind of where, we started hearing about this stuff. But as our panelists, how did you become aware of soil health, and how did you become aware of this, I guess you could say, new movement?
Okay, so I grew up in Vermont, and my family are dairy farmers, and we also maintained a large 1-acre home, vegetable production garden. And I just remember growing up in that environment and knowing the different practices that were being used by my uncles, my extended family, aunts. And when I came to New Mexico, let me step back. I also lived in Pennsylvania, and I was a berry production, so I grew and sell blackberries. And we really didn't have to water that often. We had an abundance of water. It's really nothing like here. So anyway, when I moved here and decided to do some production farming here, I quickly realized nothing was going to be the same. It was fascinating, the learning curve, how quickly I had to adapt and change different practices. And so I began a long, self-research to figure out, okay, how do I do this? How do I amend the soil? How do I work with a pH of nearly 7.8, 7.9? I come from an acidic soil background. What were all these different areas of self-research that I needed to look into? And so some of the projects that I ended up doing through this Healthy Soil Grant included creating Johnson 2 biocomposter, looking at biochar. We had a huge fire in Mora, as I'm sure you're aware, and so I harvested biochar from the forest and began learning about characins, learning about entities that turn on hormonal signaling in plants. So if I want to do a crop where I have to terminate something with maybe using a silage tarp, I might want to use a certain kind of biochar that's pyrolyzed between 400 and 500 degrees because that's when those agents are active. I can go on and geek them here, but I love it and it's fascinating. And so I think just to answer the question in entirety was that everything I had known as a child and the way that we had farmed and grown food had to be really looked at a little differently when I came out to the West. So I think that it's been a long relationship of just observing and noticing and wondering and questioning and then researching.
I promise I'm not paid by NMDA to say this, but the NMDA Healthy Soils Grant is what has made me aware of the importance of soil health. I received the grant the last 2 years for my organization, and as interesting, it is also challenging, but it's created so much structure. So having to work with NRCS to create a conservation plan and learning what soil resource concerns even are, and then what those are, and the practices to help mitigate those. So really the structure of this grant has provided me with so much knowledge and education and deeper understanding of the importance of soil health, because we've also seen, even just in really 2 years plus additional years with the organization, the Conservancy has worked with New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group. We've done prescribed grazing in the past very haphazardly based on our financial resources, being a small nonprofit. So again, this grant has provided all of those resources to have this big push, and we're seeing that rehabilitation is possible. So that all of those things combined, and then I've actually had a very special personal experience through all of this, is like realizing, so I grew up in South County, Santa Fe, so I'm from here, and looking at all the things that I did with my parents on their property, which was formerly cattle land that then my dad has just done a lot of conservation on. And so I didn't even realize I was doing soil health for all these years of organic gardening, as well as pruning dying junipers and then putting them in on the slopes to help slow that down, and looking over the course of my 35 years of all these grasses that have come back and rehabilitation that's possible, even without doing all of the other things. So it's been this really special experience of now all I see are all the places where soil health is. So that awareness was, you know, specific to the grant, and that has just widened my view of how so much of my life has been about soil health, which is really special.
What a lovely story that is. Wow. Well, I came to the soil health world through my initial career in wastewater management. I was a sewer guy, and I was hired by the city in 1989 to make their pilot composting facility function. The engineers had built this thing, but they had no idea how to run it, so they hired a biologist to make it work. I also knew zero about composting, but muddled my way through to figure out how to make compost out of sewage sludge, which we now call biosolids. And a big part of making a successful biosolids composting program is to sell this stuff to the public, is to convince the public that it's okay to use this stuff. You know, everybody knows where it came from, and it's like, I'm gonna put that in my yard? I don't think so. So, in the process of trying to sell this material to the public so that we could actually, you know, do something with it after investing all that time and energy into making it into compost, I had to learn, and was happy to learn, a lot about the importance of organic matter, especially stabilized organic matter like compost, to soil health. And of course, why that contributes to soil health and how it supports the microbial ecosystem in the soil and so on and so forth. And so that was my initial introduction. And somehow or another, I got recruited to become a board member on Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District in 2003. And all of a sudden, the whole world of soil and water health and natural resource protection opened up to me, and it gave me huge opportunities to learn more and communicate more and become more connected with the communities, you all and others. And my last career step in local government was stormwater management for Bernalillo County. And it turns out that one of the best ways to manage stormwater, urban stormwater, and protect our water resources like the Rio Grande is to build tiny little, if you will, gardens, rain gardens. We can't call them that in the arid environment, as you so pointed out, but to build grain stormwater infrastructure facilities. And guess what's super important in the GSI facility is soil health, is the ability of the soil. This thing is gonna drive me crazy. I'll just leave it there. And so that was another way to exploit and understand how important soil health is for the protection of our environment, for the support of our waterways and our urban environments. So I guess after, what would that be? That's a lot of years. I guess I'm gonna steal a term from one of our board members and classify myself as an official dirt nerd at this point.
Okay, clearly we understand that there's a need and an importance for soil health. What are the barriers?
Okay, so on a small scale farming production, I would say that barriers often include mechanized equipment that's suitable for small environments. So I don't want a huge combine. I'd like to get a small test plot research size combine, something that, because I don't want to compact my soils, and because I am planting in different arrays, I want something that's smaller. And unfortunately, those kinds of, as you all know, equipment is very expensive. So sometimes the kind of equipment that might enable me to protect the soil or to work with that in a different means is going to be costly. So again, that's not a new story in the world of agriculture, but it's particularly difficult if we have to import things that are made outside the United States. So looking at research partnerships to have small scale machinery created, I think would be something wonderful, and then having a funding stream for that. So I was really fortunate to receive a healthy food financing fund this year. I'm also a New Mexico Grown Approved supplier, and that fund allowed me to buy a small-scale set of equipment to help farm for produce, and that really, I couldn't do it without that. So just having funds set for small-scale farmers or for market production gardening, community. Another part of that is also the grain chain. We don't have mills, we don't have places where we can actually process some of the grains that we might be growing. So why am I talking about grains? Well, grains are cover crop. It's something that's, again, it's this integral systemic issue, is that if we want to have folks grow these things, we have to be able to process them, then we have to store them, we have to be able to bring them to market. So in terms of when I'm thinking about healthy soil issues on my farm, I might be using yak for bioturbination, and I might be thinking about making sure that I'm planting these cover crops and that I am using timing, and I'm really thinking about how do I create, kind of you were talking about rain gardens, I might cut in swales or use terracing, ways to slow that water down. All these things are going to require equipment, which I think was the big point I wanted to emphasize, is if there was funding for us little guys, and then land availability. How do we make this available for young people? How do we make it so that they want to and can afford to do this? So that's my pitch for the folks in the room that will hear that message. But I am so grateful for this Healthy Soil program, because there was a component that allowed me to buy equipment that I really need to fulfill some of these objectives. And I'll be going into my third year. This is the third year where I've received this grant. And I can't even tell you the kinds of projects and the scale of things that I've been able to accomplish because of it, that I would not have otherwise been able to necessarily from my farming budget. So, labor, sorry, is the last thing. I have an intern right now through Ogallala Commons, who is a nonprofit organization. I cannot tell you what a joy and an unbelievable gift that has been. And so having ways to partner and provide additional labor for young people to be in farming, I think is really important.
Yeah, to agree with Kristen, I think unfortunately, as a lot of us know, there's a lot of financial barriers to really any of this. So for a small nonprofit, everything comes down to a financial barrier for us, as well as labor. So we really pride ourselves on the fact that we utilize volunteer man and woman power, and that we are trying to sort of be more part of that paradigm shift where we're all kind of contributing to the commons. But it is hard. It's hard to get people to do hard manual labor without paying them. So that's one of our struggles. Luckily, we have some good high school youth programs that come in, and I have them follow all of our compost, and that's great. I would also say it was touched on in the opening statements, and it's something that Dean and I have spoken about a lot in all of our meetings, where being city adjacent, I hear this a lot, but it comes down to the way things have always been. I think we've all heard that, and it is something that infuriates me on the daily, because clearly it's not working. Like, can we move on? We've seen what works, what doesn't work. We have the data. We're working on the data, and I think, again, that's what's driving me to be more accepting of the challenges that this grant presents, which is data collection, consistency, something that we struggle with without having enough labor, but I know how important having this data is. So, yeah, I think that the way things have always been, that's, in my mind, our biggest barrier.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. is that probably one of the largest barriers that we as a conservation district encounter in trying to implement healthy soil principles is a lack of knowledge about what those principles are and how important they are and how interconnected they are. And second, that resistance, that momentum, that grandpa always did it this way and dad always did it this way, and why should I do it differently? So those are real impediments, I should say obstacles to try to get over, and it's all about getting education out there. But the second part of that picture is providing the funding, as has been mentioned before by my co-panelists here, that finding the funding, to kickstart that healthy soil process, right? I mean, you have, as we heard from our keynote speakers, it just doesn't happen on its own without some, like, you can reduce carbon loss, but it's not going to improve the health of the soil unless you start improving the carbon influx. And so that's not cheap, that carbon influx. I mean, yes, you can do cover crop, but it takes years and years. And people want to see a more, in order to be convinced, right, they want to see a more immediate reaction. And what that means is bringing in organic matter and incorporating it to kickstart that microbial community and that microbial ecosystem down there. So funding is critical for that. And then I guess the third, when you combine those two, it's the awareness of the Healthy Soil Program and the ability of both public and private land managers to access this fund and this education and this experience that will improve their understanding and their commitment to the Healthy Soil principles. So.
Okay. On your either your personal operation or Steve in your situation, the constituents that you work with, what are the most pressing soil health concerns that you deal with? So, Chris.
Sure. I think in Mora County, we're looking at soil erosion. So on a windy day, you can just watch fields. You just see the plume of dirt, because it's not soil, just dust blowing across some of the pastures. And alfalfa is one of the main crops. We're not really growing food necessarily for human consumption, it's mostly forage. So I would say that looking at erosion, soil erosion, is one of the concerns. I think that sort of the doing it the same way mantra is an issue, in the sense that, if you have equipment, if you have practices that people have been doing for a long time, you tend to try to stick with that. I feel like we're really looking at water retention, trying to figure out, I talked about the Healthy Soil Program at my ASECA meeting, just saying like, hey, there's funds available to look at how you can maybe change some things on your farm, your ranch, where it might save you some money, it might help increase some kind of aspect of production. Trying to think of, I think that it's sort of the same usual issues that we've really been talking about today in its entirety, but also just how to help an aging population carry on with these practices and carry forward that information and some of the indigenous knowledge, just historical knowledge of how to do things, incorporating modern technology, like how to help revive that in our particular region.
I'll speak to the 11 acres that I work on, but then also sort of the greater Santa Fe area. I think the urban landscape itself, one of the things we've dealt with, we're historically a brownfield, and so this was all man-made. So compaction, percent bare ground. When we began our project, we were at about 50% bare ground. I would like to think that at this point we're about 95%, so we're seeing it get better, but that was a really big issue. And then we're sort of looking at, as you move out from the park and you drive through Santa Fe, there's just a lot of bare ground in general. So to Steve's earlier point too, that the concern of water infiltration, the ability for the irrigation systems that we're now trying to revamp at the Railroad Park, are those going to be, is that water going to be well used and not wasted? So between the bare ground, compaction, and water infiltration, we're basically like making soil out there as we speak. So that would be our biggest issues.
I had to think about this one for a while because, we live in a city. So we have a lot of very unique, I would say, or maybe just on steroids type of soil health issues. And of course, to me, the largest concern in our particular area of the world and the people within our district that apply for these grants is the loss of organic matter. These soils have not been, reconstituted. You know, people have been, those that do farming, which is in the South Valley basically and a little bit in the East Mountains, have really not striven, if you will, to reintroduce the organic matter and keep that cycle going. So we have a lot of organic matter loss in our neck of the woods, our very urban neck of the woods. We also have a lot of soil compaction. There have been nearly 1 million human beings stomping around here in the Middle Rio Grande for a long, long time, and driving vehicles and doing paving chunks of it, and so we get a lot of compaction, whole lot of compaction, and along with that compaction and that loss of organic matter, we're also seeing urban heat island effect, because we've got a lot of excess heat coming from all that pavement, so our soils are actually hotter than the surrounding, which is another huge problem that we face in terms of soil. And of course, compacted soil means that you don't have infiltration. It means that whatever carbon is deposited doesn't get into the subsoil. And so, we're faced with, I don't know that they're unique. I like to say, well, we're a very unique conservation district because we have all these urban issues, and we do. But when it comes to soil concerns, we just basically have all the issues that the more rural people have, but on steroids, because we've got the urban influence as well. And I think I put a fourth one down. Let me see, I had to make notes because, let's see, 1 second, sorry, Dean.
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, right, and the last one is loss of cover and living root. And what basically whatever small amount of cover and living root was here originally, we continually remove it to put either a subdivision in there or one of those strip malls in there. And so that's a big reason why one of our major resource concerns at CUDOT is the maintenance of local agriculture and the prevention of urbanization and sprawl, because we know the effect that has on what remaining soil there is here in the Middle Rio Grande.
So, based on those concerns you've listed, what do you think is the best approach to begin addressing those?
Okay, so in terms of, when I think about erosion, soil compaction, so my farm, it's small, it's a 35-acre farm, and it had a former racetrack on it, and so I know a thing or two about compaction. I've done no-till drilling for the last 3 years now, and that was a choice I made because I didn't want to rip it up and cause even more dust. I wanted to try to keep the microbiome intact. So what's tricky is when you rent equipment, I don't own one because they're very expensive. It's a Great Plains, I think it's a 10-foot drill. They're very expensive pieces of equipment, and so our Soil and Water Conservation District owns one, and when we do have an operator, we can rent this piece of equipment. So I think that just ways to address it are, again, availability of equipment, whether that be through a cooperative situation, through individual grants, and then some kind of sharing program. Just some way to get hands of these wonderful pieces of equipment. We heard all about those no-till trials in some of the prior presentations today, but getting access to that kind of equipment is a barrier, and so things to mitigate that, I think, would be really helpful. Programs that may also enable individuals to purchase those kinds of pieces of equipment, I think would be really helpful. When I think about the acequias, so for us in particular in Mata County, the Gallinas watershed, like just the incredible amount of water that now comes down off of the mountains, because it's like clay at this point. It just, all the topsoil is gone and everything just runs down, and so we have a lot of water mitigation and redesign of our acequias, of our riparian areas, where we're just getting hammered with debris that's coming down. Ways to enable people who are local to take action in conjunction with a larger entity. I think just how to form those partnerships are incredibly important. I don't have the answer on how to do this, but I see that there's a need for individuals to be able to take action on their own pieces of property. If you gave me a piece of equipment, I work hard, I will go out and work on that stream bed area. But if I don't have access to that equipment, I'm limited in what I may do because I have to wait and borrow, and you know how that goes. So in terms of the living root issue, making sure that we have availability of suitable cover crop seed that we can get our hands on. Like I find that that's really hard at certain times of year. I got to drive really far. I go up to Colorado to pick up cover crop seed. So just making things available. And again, I don't have the answers. I just see what happens on a daily basis.
Again, answering for just my small little square that I manage. But to Kristen's point, like that's what I have to think about every day when I'm out there is what can I do today? I think it can get really overwhelming to look at a whole big piece. I think some of this, especially looking at the global science side of things, I think it can get really overwhelming. So I think for me, finding what we can do in our little quadrants, I think is really empowering. And again, the rehabilitation I've seen in just 3 acres is amazing and really, again, empowering. So we implement, like I said, the healthy soil principles are the foundation of our horticulture management. So we're addressing all 5 of those pretty much all of the time. And so when we're moving leaves from a pathway because it looks messy and I'm managing a public space, we're putting that on our grassland restoration. We're doing chop and drop rather than pulling. So just all these like little things, and I'm like really used to talking to people who maybe don't know anything about soil health, and I have to maybe have a one-off with the big church group that comes down from Glorieta, and I just have to impart how important this is. And but then it's really great too when I can get groups that come out for Friday service projects, these high schoolers, and to get to show them too, like, hey, remember in the fall when I had you guys hauling all these leaves and you were begrudgingly doing it? Well, look at all this grass, and having young men, like 17-year-old boys, actually like excited about something is a real win. So I think just seeing those little ways that we can do these things. We also, the biggest thing that this grant does for our organization is we're able to host prescribed grazing days, which we call Graze Days. We hire a local organization from South County, Santa Fe, and they bring on a herd of goats and sheep. These are about 3 times in the fall, 3 times in the spring. Again, that is now much more intentionally timed. That has been a huge impact. And I think, again, for me, my environmental science background is very much also tied to like, how do we translate all of this to the public, to the person who can't, even myself, interpreting some of these graphs and charts it's hard. So how do we have really good ways to educate people? Cute animals in the park is a great way to do that. We trick people into coming to the park, and then I talk at them about soil health, and I get them really excited. So, and it keeps them coming back. So that has been a great, what prescribed grazing can do is incredible. So yeah, I could go on and on. See?
Thanks. Well, I couldn't agree more that public education is the key for getting past at least the hurdles that exist for us. Not only in the education of the public who don't do farm or soil health things, but of course those that do, right? And so once we get that information out there and we can demonstrate in a number of areas the success of healthy soils principles, we hope that it will expand, and we have 5 minutes left, Freeman. All right, we're rushing through here. Boy, we did vociferous, haven't we? And so demonstration projects as well as public education projects, and And finally, something that we don't have here in New Mexico, and I wish we did, and we're working on it, is a soil testing lab. We have to send them to Colorado or Oklahoma, or and it was a sad day in my life when the SWAT lab down at NMSU closed, and we were on the cusp of forming one here in Albuquerque, but that kind of fell apart. So we're still working on it because we have the advocate for that soil testing lab on our board now. So we're going to, as a district, we're going to try to pull together some soil testing services here that everybody in the state can use, because it's critical to understand, as was mentioned in so many presentations today. You've got to understand a healthier soil before you can start making changes that improve that health. So those are the things that I think need to be done.
I just want to say one thing about that. So I use Regen Labs, and I had a PLFA test done, and it was really interesting because I found that I had a nice array of different kinds of fungi, bacteria, but I am missing protozoa. And so that now gives me a very clear target of the kind of legumes that I'm going to be replanting. But just, I can't advocate enough to have really thorough and consistent, using the consistent lab for the testing aspect.
Well, I know we've got just a few minutes left, but I want this one last question. I'm actually going to throw you a curveball. We're going to skip a question. But knowing that we have a room that has a large portion of researchers, okay, what is one important unanswered question about soil health that you would ask the researchers, or maybe they need to design a project? Because we've got them in the room, they're somewhat captive, and but there's a lot of questions that we don't have an answer to. But what would be one that you would ask a researcher, maybe that's they haven't even answered it yet? So.
Wow. Okay. I think about creating new technology all the time. Like, how could you harvest the biomass that's in the forest in Mora and San Miguel counties, and create pellets? How do you create ways to get that into the ground? Like, what are other injection methods or ways that you could get carbon into the ground? That's one thing that just immediately pops into my head. I'm going to think for a second and pass it to Peggy to it.
I luckily did sit with this, but it's challenging. It feels less and less like this, but one of the challenges I had early on with studying soil health too is just like how, it's like, I think there is some stat where we know more about the oceans than we do about soil. That might be wrong at this point, but it's just, there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of data yet to do. So less specific than Kristen's, I guess like just how important it is. Like, how do we explain that?
One thing I thought of, it was somebody's poster over there that I had read it, and I noticed that in biochar production, it increased salinity levels. And so I was curious about that, and I was curious about mitigation of salinity, because that is one of the issues on my farm. And so again, how to put information into like hands, boots on the ground for me and my neighbors and other ranchers and farmers. Like, how do we just actually do some of these things? Like, I'm curious just about that right off the bat. And then I was really interested in those results that we just saw right before this panel, with the nitrogen uptake absorption. I think, why was that? And why was that a factor? And I think about how other kinds of input, like how do we change the kind of inputs that we're adding that can give us similar benefits, but don't have the same levels of toxicity?
Okay, I thought of another one too. Being in an urban space, how do we, I learned so much from this about agriculture and the importance, and that feels more rural and more agricultural, but how do we again, the importance in an urban setting, or what is the importance in an urban setting, to Steve's point on the urban heat island effect as well.
That's a hard act to follow. They asked great questions already. I guess we had a great example of something that I would like to see further research. Personally, in Dr. Lewis's presentation, where she pointed out that even the improvement in soil health, the parameters of soil health, don't necessarily result in better cotton production. And so my issue would be, well, can we somehow relate certain soil health parameters to the success of crops of interest, so that we understand, hey, if you have this fungi to bacteria to protozoan ratio, you're going to do great for your cannabis crop or whatever. So that would be an area of research that would be of interest, I think, to me, and it would be great to have that information to take to some of our horticulturalists and agriculturalists here in our district and give them some more specifics about this is going to make you more successful.
And if there are any biologists in the room, how do we bring back the Blackfoot ferret to be the natural predator to prairie dogs? Wonderful. Talk to me.
Well, I think that's about the time we have for our panel. I want to offer our thanks to you for being on the panel, and I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and I think we're going to eat, but again, I just want to thank you for participating in our panel.